Hello, and welcome back to the Success Catalyst podcast, where we explore the strategies, stories, and mindset that drive real change. I'm your host, Nina Robert, and today I have the pleasure of speaking with a truly inspiring guest. Kalyani Pardeshi is a TEDx speaker, multi-award winning author, and Canada's only certified Flowcess trainer. Her work helps people move beyond unhealthy motivational behaviors to achieve a more meaningful and fulfilling life. I'm thrilled to dive deeper into Kalyani's story today, her transformative approach to mental wellness, and the incredible impact she's had through her engagements. Welcome to the show, Kalyani.
Thank you so much, Nina. I really appreciate being here.
I'm really excited to ask you all kinds of questions because I know the importance of setting boundaries and also the difference between motivating just to motivate without background, without a true recipe, let's say, for motivation and for discipline, and the unhealthy motivation and maybe toxic positivity that we somehow see on social media nowadays. So let's start with the first question. Your journey is so unique, having grown up in an era in South Africa. I don't know where exactly, but how did those experiences shape your personal philosophy, first of all, and maybe approach to overcoming adversity?
Um, Thank you for that beautiful question. So I grew up during apartheid years in South Africa during the peak where racial discrimination was at its highest. And I think one of the hardest things that I needed to overcome was viewing any achievement or success of mine being attributed to my skin color. And what
Mm,
I mean by this is that every time I landed a job or got an award for something, I would always find myself wondering if I was chosen because I'm a person of color. This came from the fact that when South Africa abolished apartheid in the early 90s, one of the policies implemented in the workforce was BEE. Broad-based Black economic empowerment is a government policy to advance economic transformation and enhance the economic participation of Black people. And this would be African, mixed race, and Indian people who are South African citizens. So I found myself wondering if I got opportunities simply because I had the right skin color.
mhm.
And furthermore, in one particular job, my coworker told me that I only got the job because I fit the BEE profile, which made the company look progressive. It was only after working with the founder of Flowcess, John Lenhart, that I was able to understand who I am at the core of my being and hence overcome this adversity.
Wow, that is so interesting because, yeah, maybe like the majority of people don't know that, but sometimes this, I mean, differentiating or labeling people for their skin color and attributing success to your skin color, that's so unfair and maybe not talked about enough, I guess. So it's our opportunity today to engage more on this subject. And I know that you are the only certified Flowcess trainer, sorry, in Canada now. So you're helping people overcome unhealthy motivational behaviors and many other things. So can you tell us more about the Flowcess method and how it differs from traditional motivational approaches?
I like to ask people, do they judge others on their intention or their behavior?
Okay,
And
that's
usually people say their behavior because that's
yeah.
what we see, right?
Yeah.
And then I ask them, do you want to be judged on your intention or your behavior? And the answer is always going to be intention. We don't want to be judged on our behavior.
Yeah.
So are we our behaviors or are we our intentions? What are we? So Flowcess is the only organization in the world with a non-contradictory model for the mind and brain. We help people understand what intrinsically motivates them regardless of their circumstances. And we
Mhm.
call this their intangible drivers. And from there, we teach them how to navigate their brains according to their unique intangible drivers. And this is going to be different. It's going to be unique to each individual. It isn't a one size fits all approach. I feel traditional motivational approaches tend to take the concept of, well, this worked for me, so it will work for you too. I like to think of intangible drivers or intrinsic motivators as our God given gifts or gifts we've had since the day we were born. And once we understand this about ourselves, we're able to give up everything else that's not true to us and just focus on those intangible drivers. People call it your soul or your authentic self.
Wow, that's the first time I hear about Flowcess method, and it sounds really unique because this is the first time I hear that the difference between judging based on behavior or judging based on intention. It's totally true. I naturally would like people to judge me on my intentions, but I have no guarantee that my behavior and my intention were aligned, that I ended up speaking or treating that person or acting as I intended to. We have no guarantee of that whatsoever. So that's very, very, I think, powerful to focus on that. I want to talk about your latest book, Beyond the Inner Critic. And between parentheses, for our listeners, I'll add all your social links and the link to your book so that we can find you easily and interact with you and connect with you. So, Beyond the Inner Critic focuses on conquering our inner bullies. I love that name as well because we end up forgetting that sometimes we are inner bullies to ourselves or to other people without even noticing that. That's also correlates with intention versus behavior. So what inspired you to write this book, and why is tackling the inner critic so crucial for personal growth?
This year, I was a guest on Global TV Calgary where I spoke of this concept, and I just had 6 minutes to speak. And I received a message from one of the viewers after the show, and she said she learned so much in just a few minutes that she'd
Wow.
never thought of bullying from that perspective. And I felt more people needed access to this information in an easily consumable way. So
Yeah.
I decided to write this book. Now, if we don't take our inner critic, if we don't tackle it, if we don't address it right away, and it requires taking backward steps versus taking forward action steps to silence our inner critic, we end up in engaging in so-called motivational behaviors, which are detrimental to us in the long term. It can result in burnout and the inability to understand how we burnt out because we're so positive.
Yeah, and that's what toxic positivity is about. Because also with toxic positivity, you're sending maybe a message to your subconscious mind to stay disciplined, to incorporate as many healthy routines as possible during the day, and to track your success. At the end of the day, you're exhausted, not because you've done all these things, but because all these things are just an incorporation of toxic positivity, and you're trying so hard to sound positive, to look successful, and to check cases like your to-do list or your daily routine behavior, whatever you're tracking yourself to do. And at the end of the day, it's just self-bullying because we're not really intentionally and behaviorally, for that matter, taking care of ourselves and being our own best friend. I think that's very important, to treat ourselves as our own best friend.
I just want to interject here before we go to the next question. I like how what my friend Ajit Dodani says. He says you have to treat yourself like you're a luxury item. So what he
Mm.
does is he asks, like, if you have a Gucci purse, how are you going to treat it?
Yeah.
You know, are you going to just throw it in the corner, or are you going to like really look after it? So if you're going to look after your Gucci purse really well, why are you not going to look after yourself really well?
Yeah. Let's see it as the same way a woman would treat her Birkin bag or a man would treat his Porsche. Like, this is the most amazing thing they've ever dreamed of having, and now they're having it, so they're taking very good care of it, and they're making sure it's never harmed and it's always healthy and would live longer, and it's always shiny if it's a car or a bag. But are they doing the same thing for their health, for their well-being, for their own self-care? I doubt it, because we take ourselves for granted most of the time. That's a very good that's a very good way to look at things. So consider yourself or treat yourself as a luxury item, because guess what? You are the most luxurious thing you'll ever have. That's true. And you're never taken for granted. You never know when you stop being healthy. You never know when you need more care. You never know how long you're gonna live. You never know how this life that you achieved or maybe that you're aspiring to achieve is gonna end. So that's the most luxurious thing we have. Our life, our bodies, our time, our dreams. So let's take care of that. One of your recent engagements was with the Calgary Military Family Resource Center, where you led mental wellness course. I'd love to know more about that. What were some of the key takeaways for participants, and how did they resonate with military families?
Covered a lot. How our brains work, picture and processing perspectives, communication guidelines, understanding your intangible drivers, the dysregulation, regulation, self-regulation, and flow thought processes, self-bullying, and self-esteem. The entire course helped participants understand how to handle adversities thrown at us because life happens. We
Yeah.
discussed anger issues, PTSD, depression, addiction, stress, anxiety. Many of the participants had quite a few aha moments when they understood the why and the how of each issues. They knew what had happened in the moment, but they didn't know why. I
Mhm.
had a participant share that her husband passed out after an anxiety attack and she didn't know why. As part of my teaching, she learned that anxiety is caused by an internal event through your amygdala. It requires a very fast brain. It's making several decisions that trigger the amygdala. Each triggering releases another dose of adrenaline to the point that a person can have a heart attack. The
Wow.
body's default to guard against it is to have the person pass out.
Mhm.
Until she learned this information, she thought it was a bad thing that her husband had passed out after an anxiety attack. But she felt very settled knowing that it was a good thing because
Yeah.
his body was guarding against him having a heart attack from adrenaline overload.
Wow. We sometimes underestimate how our bodies are here for us, where we don't even know what's happening. Our bodies will maybe like shut down all the system, like let's faint instead of having a heart attack or instead of having this anxiety going on. And sometimes the body expresses itself in diseases, and I like to hyphenate the word disease as dis-ease, because it's just a signal that your body's sending you that this is not a state of ease I'm in. So I'm going to show you symptoms, fever, catching colds, immune problems, or autoimmune for that matter, and then you have to take care of that. But we end up treating the symptoms instead of listening to what our bodies are really trying to say to us. That's very important and such a wake-up call for people who have such experiences, while being surrounded by the right people to actually tell them what's happening, instead of just, okay, he fainted, maybe, I don't know, he did a trigger or something, and we just ignore the root cause of the problem.
You passed out.
Yeah, wake up and keep going. Yeah, that's maybe you need coffee. I don't know. Maybe some vitamins. Let's keep going. So that's interesting. Um, so in your presentation, Kalyani, for CPAs in Alberta and Saskatchewan, you exposed the motivation myth and talked about mental fatigue and burnout. Why do you think burnout is so prevalent, especially among professionals, and how can we begin to address it effectively?
I love what you just said before about we're treating symptoms with effects, and that's what we're doing. Because I believe we tend to address symptoms of burnout with effects. You take some
Mhm.
time off, you get more sleep, go on vacation, meditate every single day.
Yeah.
The thing is, we're not looking at the root cause of burnout, and without addressing that, the burnout's just going to keep coming back, right?
Yeah.
Through my training with Flowcess, I uncovered other causes of burnout that are rarely addressed. Self-bullying, these are the motivational behaviors we tend to embrace to combat the inner critic without addressing the cause of the inner critic itself. And because we're not addressing the cause, it won't go away. And we'll get into this addictive habit of pursuing motivational behaviors to silence the inner critic, which leads to burnout. The second cause is operating against our intangible drivers, what intrinsically motivates us. And the third cause can also be operating in our intangible drivers in an unhealthy thought process. Now, I'm going to give you some examples to demonstrate this. My intangible drivers are compassion server, which means that the effect I want others to experience is to not feel bad while they're going through the pain of growth. And I do this, my behavior. So my intention is compassion. My behavior to fulfill my intention is by adjusting to fill the need to fulfill this purpose. So sometimes this adjustment can be observing, teaching, giving an idea, etc. For 2 years, I ran an online fitness business and I operated outside of these intangible drivers. I was trying to be an exhorter server. So I wanted others to have the effect of being encouraged to move forward. And I was adjusting to fill the need to fulfill this purpose. And this resulted in burnout. I had to shut the business down. I like to equate this with trying to put in jet fuel from an airplane into a car. Your engine will still turn over, but it will stall after a while. While operating in an unhealthy thought process in my own uniqueness as compassion server, I would enable others because I didn't want them to feel the pain of growth if I told them the truth. I prevented their growth. And the more I did this, the more codependent they became on me, which also resulted in burnout.
Wow, that is so interesting for me, especially because part of my teachings as a mindset coach is goal setting and goal achievement, but it's also the self-image. And the self-image is the subconscious opinion that we have of ourselves. And I think this is what triggers or what initiates, among other things, the self-critic. Because if we think of ourselves as incapable of doing something or unworthy of our goal that we chose, we end up critiquing ourselves. We end up having negative thoughts about our ability, and that's like a cycle of toxicity that we tend to maybe cover with toxic positivity, and it's a never-ending cycle. It never ends, and it never shows us the real cause of the problem. The problem may show the symptom as anxiety, as stress, and we end up covering the symptom with, I don't know, breathing techniques, meditation, exercising, like getting all this adrenaline out at the gym, and then maybe ending up with some dopamine and some endorphins that make us feel better for just a couple of minutes or a couple of hours before it triggers again and again.
Exactly.
Wow, that is so interesting that many approaches correlate. Like at the end, we are treating the same issue, that is our opinion about ourselves and our self-critique and our self-bullying. That is such an interesting subject and topic that it's never talked about enough. We hear people telling us all kinds of things to make you feel better, to feel more productive. Like, here are 5 things I do every day to feel successful. And here are the 3 things that you need to do to relax. And okay, but yeah, what's the problem? Why am I not actually in that state? Why do I need to implement all these boosters? So being aware of our self-bullying and our intention versus behavior, that's something that really struck me in our conversation today. That's really interesting. I know that, Kalyani, you've also worked with teens to tackle issues like self-bullying and conformity. I think this is a biggie in teens, bullying each other or self-bullying for that matter. So how do you approach these conversations that I assume are very difficult with young people? And what advice do you give them to embrace their individuality?
So I love this, but I'm going to deviate a little bit here. So I recently finished that same 6 lesson course with young offenders in jail,
Mhm.
and that was probably my toughest audience. But I usually what I do is I share stories of my own, and to watch their behavior change, because behavior changes unconsciously and not consciously. But when I specifically spoke to this group of teens, and I'm not talking about the boys that are at the Young Offender Center, but specifically the kids of immigrants, because they have their own set of challenges. What I did is I talked about becoming an overachiever because I didn't want to disappoint my parents. And it was important to me to communicate with them and to share with them how they can communicate with their parents to prevent unhealthy expectations, which could result in self-bullying. As teens within somewhat of a rigid school system, we learn unconsciously that we have to be good at everything. And this
Mhm.
puts a lot of unnecessary pressure on a child. During this particular workshop, teens were given the intangible driver quiz so they could uncover their intangible drivers, or what I like to call the God-given gifts, or gifts they were born with, they've had since the day they were born. And knowing that using these gifts in a healthy thought process is literally the only thing they need to be good at, it takes the pressure off of them. And focusing on this is what helps them embrace their individuality. They realize they're not like the next person, and they don't have to do things like the next person because they have their own uniqueness. And it's about operating in your own uniqueness, and that's going to look different for each person.
Wow, and that is not taught in school, unfortunately. We don't
Yeah.
teach the children this. We teach them the exact opposite, sadly, because as you said, the expectation is to be good at everything, which does not make sense. And if it makes sense, if the child somehow achieves that level of being good at everything, like imagine the amount of self-bullying or bullying, maybe from the parents, maybe from the other kids that will make fun of the first top of the class. I know I used to be made fun of because I was top of the class, and that made me miserable. Every time I would have like good grades, I was like, okay, I'm not gonna be able to have friends anymore because everyone hates me. And then my parents were not even satisfied with whatever results I got. So I didn't really get any satisfaction from being good at school whatsoever. So that's truly amazing that you are talking about these things with young people. I think that resonates a lot with them.
Thank you.
Now, Kalyani, in your session for the Association of Administrative Professionals, you share tools for emotional resilience. I love that concept, emotional resilience. So, can you tell me more about what are some of the most effective strategies you recommend for maintaining emotional resilience in the face of daily stress?
So, to answer this question, I need to give my definition of resilience, which is the ability to maintain a healthy thought process regardless of our circumstances. When we
Mhm,
speak of emotional resilience, we're talking about the four basic conscious brain emotions which have an immediate known cause: happy, angry, sad, or afraid. The
mhm,
key to peace is having your conscious and your unconscious brains synced up. Stress
yeah,
occurs when they are not in sync. Our
mhm,
unconscious brain, which is 90% of our brain, it does not know what we're consciously thinking unless we state it out loud or we write it down. People always say, oh, you should journal, it's so good. And they don't know why, but this is why we journal. It's so that we can let our unconscious brain know what we're consciously thinking and bring them closer together. When we talk out loud or we journal, it results in less stress because we're sharing with our unconscious brain what is going on in our conscious brain,
mhm,
bringing them more aligned, more in sync, which results in less stress. As for emotions of being angry, sad, or afraid, the key to dissolving this is sharing our emotions with someone who will reflect a less negative emotion back to us. And this is really important. I mean, one of the things that I share in my teachings is how I do not share my emotions with my mother because she is not able to reflect a less negative emotion back to me. She makes the emotion worse for me. So it's really important when someone else is sharing their emotions with you, make sure you reflect a less negative emotion back because
mhm.
that's going to help build that emotional resilience. It's like, okay, wow, thanks, I feel better.
That also resonates with me so much because I have a personal example of many times I have been through personal challenges, sometimes health challenges, and I prefer not to talk about these to anybody that I know cares for me, but because I know their level of stress and care for me would reflect in such a negative manner, so that would actually make me more concerned and actually more
Yeah.
stressing because they would be like so, I don't know, worried about the situation, and I will be the one calming them down like, hey, this, it doesn't matter, it's not that big of a deal. And eventually I'll end up convinced that it's actually a big deal, seeing their reflection of whatever I conveyed as bad news, whatever they are. So eventually I would prefer not to share to some extent most of my challenges because I expect the feedback that is supposedly um, caring and supportive to be eventually just negative and to impress more stress on me.
Exactly. And that's what happens is people don't understand. So one of the things my mom always says to me is, well, you don't share anything that's going on with me, as in with what's going on with you. And she's right, I don't, because I don't get back that less negative emotion, right? And if I shared something positive with her, she, you know, she kills the party. She will say something negative. So it's like, I'm just going to listen to you because she's server giver. I'm just going to listen to you. As compassion server, my job is refuge. I'm going to give you a place where you can share your feelings, but I'm not going to be sharing mine.
Yeah, yeah. And it takes time to learn how to manage this kind of relationships, like depending on the nature of the person, if they're too sensitive, if they're too caring, but sometimes in a more negative way, you know what to share and what not, and to what extent, to eventually just protect yourself and them from whatever outcome that conversation may have.
Exactly. And sorry, I just want to say that's why it's so important to know your own intangible drivers and the other person's. So you can see the intention. I mean, the intention might be she's literally, trying to help by giving me an idea on how I could do better on something, but it's coming off badly because I'm having a bad emotion right now. So it's just not judging her on her behavior, but more on her intentions. Like, I understand the intention is just coming out sideways because she's in an unhealthy thought process. In a healthy thought process, it'll be an idea for improvement, while in an unhealthy thought process, it will be an idea that comes from fear.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I think fear would be a big trigger in most conversations, especially with our loved ones or people who care for us and for whom we care. Fear is the driver that make us care and worry for each other. And eventually, if we are under fear or under this state of fear and worrying, we will never be able to make good decision and to provide the level of support that this person needs. So it's very important to be aware of that. I know you also spoken to diverse audiences, including immigrants, about the challenges of self-bullying while chasing success, which is, I think, the main goal for immigrants. Being an immigrant myself, I know that was one of my main goals, to achieve success wherever I'm going. So what advice would you give to people struggling with self-doubt as they pursue their goals in a new environment?
Teach anyone that I work with that goals are an effect, and the
Mhm,
cause are the actions that we take to reach those goals.
mhm,
The focus should be on giving the best towards the cause, the actions we take, regardless of the outcome of those actions, because what's within our control? It's our actions.
yeah.
The results or the effects of our actions are outside our control. So, what happens when we give our best in the actions, but we don't achieve our goals? The
Mhm.
effect. We fall prey to comparative thinking. This would be where self doubt kicks in the form of critical thoughts, where we question, am I good enough? Instead, I encourage people to think contrastively. How can my actions, not me, how can my actions be wrong? Not how am I not good enough?
Mhm.
Failure shouldn't affect you as a person. It might affect the way you take action, but not who you are at the core of your being. Also, I tell them when we don't get what we want, there's three reasons for this. I believe there's three reasons for this. And the first one is we still need to develop a skill in a certain area to be able to get
Mhm.
what we want. The timing or the circumstances aren't right. And the third reason is we haven't earned enough good karma yet to get what we want.
I love that. Yeah, it totally makes sense. And yeah, what I was also, yeah, what I wanted to add is that when you experience failure, your current result is the projection or the description of a state of mind you had when you took that exam or when you started that business. It does not mean that this is what you are, a failure. It just means that that result is not what you wanted. So that would be a trigger for you to change your strategy, to change your decisions, to try something else, or to become better of what you on what you already achieved or whatever skills that you are trying to develop. So you mentioned three things: maybe developing a better skill, choosing a better moment, or maybe trying again later,
Yeah,
or
waiting for divine timing, right? That's the
waiting for
thing. You have
divine
to wait for the
timing.
right
I
timing.
love that.
So, I mean, one of the examples I love to give is first of all, when something doesn't go my way, my first question is, okay, how can this be a good thing for me?
Hmm.
And it's
Yeah.
not toxic positivity. It's just like, okay, first of all, where are my actions? Where do my actions need correcting? Secondly, how can this be a good thing for me? Now, I wanted to do a TEDx talk for, I want to say 6.5 years. And when I finally decided to apply to do a TEDx, um, the first reason it was postponed was because it was during COVID. The second time, so this was, I think, I'm trying to remember when this was. I think I almost want to say it was February 20, we're in 2022. I want to say February
Hmm.
22. And then October 2022, it was postponed again.
Mhm.
because one of the co-curators was going through personal problems at that time. So it kept getting postponed. And then when I finally got to do it in May 2023, it was because my story was complete. What had happened is I met John Lenhart, the founder of Flowcess, in August of 2022. So I had part of my story, but I didn't have the whole story. And the whole story was about understanding who I am, my intangible drivers. So once I had the whole story, the TEDx came through. So that's why I say when they say the timing and the circumstances are not right, that's exactly what it was. It was not right because my story wasn't complete. Like I know I am thinking about doing another TEDx talk, but right now my story is not complete. So that's why I'm like, okay, I have to wait till the story is complete. I think I have part one and part two. I'm still waiting for part three to come through in my story. And that is not dependent on me. It's kind of like a case study I did on someone within the Young Offender Center where he was my most challenging student, and watching him go through part one where he just gave me the hardest time to part two where he totally flipped around, and part three is dependent now on what he's going to do with it, and if that comes through then I'll be able to do the next TEDx talk.
Wow, such a great example about divine timing. And you know what? You could just figure this out by looking backwards. You could never have known that, oh, maybe this is not the end of the story. Maybe I need another ingredient to make this equation full and complete for me to do that or to achieve that. So looking backwards, we can only connect the dots looking backwards. And that's such a, I think, a wake-up call for a better attitude towards success and failure, and in order for us to stop bullying ourselves into success, because, okay, if I have not achieved my goal by the deadline that I have set to myself, maybe I needed another ingredient. Maybe the story isn't finished. And I love that because now you're looking at yourself from another point of view. And I think changing perception is great because what you also mentioned about when there's a challenge, you're looking for the opportunity behind it. That's just a change of perspective. You can always find a good thing from a bad news or a bad thing that happens, but it needs I think emotional maturity. It needs training your perception muscle. I think perception is a mental muscle that we don't train enough. We don't really train ourselves into looking at the problem from a different point of view, and we have to train ourselves into remembering to look backwards at previous experiences and taking lessons from them.
Exactly. I just want to add one more thing to that, if I may.
Sure.
Um, so last year, November, my mom lives in India. My parents live in India. She broke her femur. It was a freak accident.
Wow.
And I was actually able to ask myself, how could this be a good thing? Because I'll tell you how it was a good thing. I used all my training um, to help her. Number one, she has anxiety and panic attacks, to help her calm herself down. And then secondly, I was able to train my father, who's over 80 years old, to speak to my mom using her intangible drivers, what intrinsically motivates her to start her physical therapy. And within 3 weeks of doing this, she walked 75 steps with her walker because she had titanium rods put in her bone.
Mhm.
And this was 3 weeks after surgery. She walked 75 steps without anyone's help. She used a walker, but she did not use anyone's help. But
Mhm.
that's the power of this information that number one, yes, I was upset, but number two is like, okay, how can this be a good thing for me? And the good thing was I got to practice this information and see the results much faster than I would have if I just charged for 10,000 steps.
Yeah, wow. That's also such a great example. And always, I think awareness and change of perception is key here. You became aware that, okay, this is an opportunity for me to look for the good side of the story. And then you applied what you learned. And that helped you and your mother get better results in such a short time, rather than just setting an unachievable or unrealistic goal just because that's what's supposed to happen. That's what the best kind of the best scenario would be. That's not realistic.
No.
Now, finally, Kalyani, as you continue to grow and reach new audiences, what are your future plans for spreading the message of mental wellness and helping individuals overcome their inner critics?
So, as you know, I just published a book on the subject, and it's called Beyond the Inner Critic: Understanding and Conquering Your Conscious and Unconscious Bullies. It's available on Amazon. I'm planning to focus my attention on marketing efforts towards this book while I continue with presentations within organizations that are seeking this information. Like I said, I just wrapped up a 6 lesson mental wellness course at the Calgary Young Offender Center. And I plan to teach this course at the Women Offender Center in January. Of course, I'm open to connecting with anyone who'd be interested in what I teach.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your future goals. That sounds very exciting, and I guess millions of people could benefit from your book. So, again, I will be putting all your social media links as well as the link to buy your book on Amazon, and make sure everybody can connect with you easily on your social media. Thank you so much, Kalyani, for being such an amazing guest today on the Success Catalyst podcast. And for our listeners, thank you for listening, and we'll see you again in the next episode.
Thank you.